Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Work It Out podcast. My name is Lisi, and today's episode, I'm going to break down a little bit of my education experience. It's going to eventually lead into why I decided to major in education and become a teacher in the future. But this first part is going to be considered part one, and it's going to be from the student perspective. So, a little bit of background. So, in school and pretty much K through 12, I was always honors, gifted classes, honors classes. In high school, I was honors and AP. School pretty much came pretty naturally to myself and my siblings. So school came pretty easily to me, and throughout most of my experience, like I talked about a little bit in the last episode, I was tutoring my peers here and there. If I was done with the assignment early, I would generally help the students around me, whether they were my friends or just kind of other students in the class. If nobody was willing to answer the teacher, I eventually developed enough or I pretty much fought against my shyness to answer questions and participate in class. So I was, I am and was very much an introvert. So I didn't have a ton of energy and motivation to be talking all the time and making friends. It wasn't natural to me. I just wanted to do the best I can in school and get out, essentially. But I kind of had to force my way out of that because I ended up getting into classes where nobody was speaking up or a lot of people needed help and everybody was afraid to say anything. So I kind of made it my mission to be more of a helper. And so that played a big role in a lot of my own personal development, and the skills I developed as being a tutor would eventually lead into what I needed to become a teacher in the future. Tutoring, teaching, I was a part of a bunch of different clubs, a bunch of different classes, and I liked everything I was in. So I really wasn't picky, or I didn't really know exactly what I wanted to do in the future. I just know that everything I tried I liked. I was in chorus, I was in sports, ROTC, lots of different kinds of things, and all of that pretty much led to my last year in high school, um, pretty much not being able to decide what I wanted to do with myself in the future. I remember we had this assignment in my English class, in my AP Lit class. It was after AP testing, so nobody really gave a shit anymore. We were just kind of hanging out for the last couple months. And my teacher had us do a little assignment. It was almost like making a goodbye card saying what college we would be going to. By the point that you enter in junior and senior year, you're supposed to have applied to a lot of colleges. Despite the fact that I qualified for Bright Futures and all that kind of stuff, I did not really apply to colleges at that time. So when we had that assignment, I made this little drawing of a head with the earth in it and internet or whatever, like a stupid drawing saying oh, I'm gonna end up going to education online essentially and teaching myself whatever that meant at the time. I was very naive, and as gifted as I was, I probably should have had more guidance of what to do with myself. I should have had maybe more encouragement to apply to certain colleges, or I should have had the mentality of aim for the best thing possible. But uh, there was different mental health issues I was dealing with in high school, and a lot of commitment issues, and I really didn't know what I wanted to do. So I thought I was just going to teach myself online and never go to college and learn online, then do whatever I got to do, whatever that means for a 17, 18-year-old that doesn't know anything. So I actually graduated high school and then didn't go to college until January of the following year. So from June, when we moved from one city to another, all the way till December, I was just working the different jobs I mentioned in the first podcast episode. And then I started going to Palm Beach State in January. Before that, I was looking into a few different colleges, but again, never committing to anything. And I decided to go to Palm Beach State because they're not going to turn me away, and I figured it was the most affordable option at the time. Later, I found out I qualified for Pell Grant and Bright Futures, so I didn't have to pay for any of my degree, whether it was my AA at Palm Beach State or the rest of my bachelor's at FAU, thankfully. Honestly, I told myself at that time, if I had to pay for school, I wouldn't have gone because my mom would not have paid for our school. She couldn't afford it. She had four kids. And my twin sister was also in college, so same thing. She relied on scholarships and Pell Grant for school, like me, like I did. So, if it was up to our mom paying for college, we wouldn't have gone. And so I told myself, if I can't afford it, I'm not going. If I'm not getting it paid for me, I'm not going. I'm not going to take out any loans. I was very risk averse to loans or credit of any kind. So I pretty much decided I wasn't going to do it unless essentially I had help, like financial help. And thankfully I did. Um, so I ended up going to Palm Beach State to do my AA. In the process, still figuring out what I want to do, whether I want to be a therapist or a social worker, like a lot of different things in my mind. I wasn't really sure exactly what I wanted to do. Um, and that's when I decided to join the course in Palm Beach State. I ended up doing that for 3 or 4 semesters, and then when it was about time to go to FAU, I actually was going to transfer into their music education department. The problem with that, though, is if you wanted to be a music teacher, it's not in the regular education department at FAU. It's a part of the arts school, and so I had to audition to essentially to get into the school. And as much as I practiced, my nerves like killed me, and I essentially like bombed that audition. And so I decided to go into the regular education department. And when I was choosing what subject, I chose social studies because I thought that'd be the most interesting to study. I felt pretty well rounded in what I knew, like math, science, English, like social studies. Like I felt like if I would have gone any path, it would have been fine. So really, the decision to do social science education was more of the most interesting thing to study, history. At least at that time, that's what I was thinking. So that's a bit of a sped up version. But pretty much when I was in Palm Beach State, I talked to the guidance counselor multiple times there to try to figure out like what I was going to do, the advisors. And they weren't the most helpful, honestly. It was more just me figuring it out. But anytime I went, like, I don't know, I felt like there wasn't a lot of help there, at least in my own perspective. But I also probably didn't know what I wanted, and so how could they help somebody who's kind of clueless? So I finished my AA, moved to Boca to go to FAU, Florida Atlantic University, and the first time I moved out, so I was about 20 years old when I moved, and there I decided to finish the rest of my degree, my social science education degree. If I had had more like conviction in what I wanted to do myself, or like more solid idea of like choosing based on my interests or my talents what I would do, I probably would have made a decision earlier in high school. But high school for me was the honors and AP classes and ROTC. Like that took up all of my time, all of my energy, and so deciding what I wanted to do in the future beyond that, it just wasn't really in my mind at that time. I pretty much almost had like a fatalistic mentality. It's like, oh, once this is over, I have nothing to fucking do. Like no future, no goals, aspiration. Like I don't know. I was going through some mental health shit that I didn't really talk to many people about. I talked to a few friends about it, but most people didn't really know, and the school didn't know because most of the people that go in the honors and AP track, like they get a lot of assistance going into the college track. Like it's kind of meant to. AP classes are to get college credits ahead of time, so if you're doing that, the intention is you should be aspiring to a big college. And for whatever reason, I had things going on that I couldn't focus on that, or I was struggling to focus on that. All right, but then I went to FAU. I was living alone for the first time, working, of course, all throughout college. I was working. I was never just doing college. I couldn't afford to. So when I was living with my mom in Palm Beach State, I was still working. When I moved to Boca, of course, I had to work because I was now paying rent for myself, living with roommates, which is fine, the most affordable option. I didn't have a car through any of this, so I would either bike, walk, or bus to school when I lived at in Wellington for Palm Beach State, and then when I moved to Boca, same thing, biked or walked to work and school. Many of the things that really solidified like my attitude of I'm gonna do this, I feel good about being a teacher, was a lot of the internships that I was required to do as part of my degree. So I ended up doing a lot of observations. We would go to different levels of school. The first school that I went to was a charter school, K through 8, in which I was helping the music teacher because at that time it was when I still wanted to be a singer. This was when I was going to Palm Beach State. And so I was doing my observation hours with a music teacher, and that was a very fun experience helping them, any kids very, very little to seeing like the older kids starting to do plays. That was very fun. When I went to FAU, there was a lot more of those classes that required the hours, so I went to multiple different schools in the area and, gained more interactive experience with different kinds of classes. One of the most impactful experiences that I had was when I was working with a teacher that worked with all ELL students, English language learning students. The interesting thing about his class is that the students were from everywhere. There was a few from Taiwan, from China, from all of Latin America, from Haiti, students from everywhere. So it's not like they're all like Spanish speakers, which at least I can get somewhat a handle of. They're just students that were English language learners from everywhere. And so the accommodations that you need, there's different levels of accommodations for students that are learning English. Um, there's like basic language, there's academic language, there's different skills that students need, whether it's listening, writing, hearing, speaking, the different facets of teaching. And so this teacher, and he didn't know any other languages. He was just, given the curriculum. He was given the tools to help students with, developing English as well as learning history. It was a history class. It was a very interesting experience because my own school experience, like when I was in K through 12, was all like the honors and AP and like that kind of track. So when I came here, it was very eye opening to see the strategies that he used to encourage his students and the difficulties of not having all the resources provided. As much as Florida and other states try to do, they provide certain amounts of ELL accommodation resources, it's not always the best. And he had a lot of his own experience, like strategizing how to make the material accessible to these students, which I really appreciated learning from him. When I was in high school, I did have like in my mind this aspiration that I wanted to change the education system. I wanted to make it feel like kids weren't forced to go to college or that there was more options like in terms of bringing classes like woodshop and home ec and other kind of things back instead of just like computer classes. And just making it so that rather than kids having to go to college and starting to choose their path, I wanted to make it an option that they could do that at the high school level. um, Pretty much, again, a little bit of naivety, but I was trying to like aspire to change the education system and help students. And this is a mentality I had in high school, based on the experiences some of my friends had, the experiences I had, and difficulties choosing what I wanted to do myself. And then there was a few teachers that were very inspirational to me that I really looked up to. And so I remember there was a week towards the end of my senior year that I went like to a lot of my different favorite teachers' classes and interviewed them about like why did they become a teacher, what would they recommend as changes to the education system, changes they can do in their own classroom, changes that the schools should do, and kind of going up the chain. So just general thoughts that they had, and I put this together in like a project for myself. And so a lot of the time whenever I had a paper in college, a lot of the things I use as resources for those papers were those interviews I did with my high school teachers. So as much as I didn't know what to do with myself, I did know that I wanted to, whether it was create a foundation or like an organization or something to help students in education, because this is what I thought could do to benefit others. And so once I was going further in the program, I heard essentially this quote that's like, if you are a student planning to be a teacher, if you're like a future teacher, if you go in it with a mentality of like, you're going to change the world, you're going to change the education, if you go in it too big, these are what ends up leading like to the high like numbers of teachers that quit within their first few years. And not that I didn't hold on to these dreams like in the back of my head, but I tried to make it more purposeful to like, what can I do to create the best experience in my individual classroom? And I still had these kind of big dreams and missions in the back of my head, but I tried to be like careful with myself to not immediately expect me of all people to change shit in the world and to dream too big, because again, I was worried I was going to end up becoming a statistic of teachers that immediately dropped out within the first few years of teaching, which it did end up happening, but like it was something I was afraid of, and it was kind of put into us in our last couple of years in the education program that you want to do the best for the students that you have, realistically with what you are able to do. And of course, you can always go up the chain. You can become an administrator. You can become a principal. You can join a school board. There's a way to get to that level. But again, most teachers are they're going into it not to be some kind of politician to change things, and that's what I wanted to do. And if I was eventually going to get to that level of changing the education system, I felt like I wanted the experience of being an in-classroom teacher for a long time before I started trying to jump up and change things. A part of my perspective, at least in the education system, is that if you've never been a teacher, you shouldn't be dictating education policy. But that's a topic for another day and for later on in part two from when I discuss my experience in the education system from the teaching perspective instead of the student perspective. That will be coming up in a few episodes. All right, so we're going to shift a little bit into statistics related to education in the United States. So these resources are coming from educationdata.org, and they're backed by the National Center for Education Statistics, the NCES. So looking at total enrollment of post-secondary students, so from 2019 to 2021, there was a decline of 4.9%, which is a significant reduction, and according to this, is the most significant rate of decline in enrollment since 1951. And then 17% of all post-secondary students are in graduate programs. About 61.8% of high school graduates go on to post-secondary study directly after school, directly after K through 12. And then 61% of all students, their graduate and undergraduate, are enrolled in full time, which means they're earning 9 to 12 credits based on like the program they're in, which is considered full time. 73% of college students at all education levels attend public institutions, public versus private schools. Private schools are a lot more expensive and exclusive, so the majority of students go to public colleges. According to this, about 53.4% of college students are white or Caucasian, and then the non white student attendance has increased by 125.5% since 1976. And then enrollment among Hispanic females increased 11,074% from 1976 to 2021, which is considered the fastest ethnic and demographic group increase versus any kinds of students. That's where I fall in. A few other statistics. Among Americans aged 25 and older, 62% have a bachelor's degree. 66.6% of college students are aged 24 and under. I was always under 24 when I was in school. I graduated when I was 22 in 2020 because of COVID. My program ended a bit early. All right, more stats from the National Center for Education Statistics. The biggest majors that people end up going into are business, with 19% of students going into business, health, with 12.6%, social sciences and history, with 7.9%, not including education, that's just straight up going for a history degree. Um, Biological and biomedical sciences is 6.2, engineering 6.3, and then education, I'm just going to skip some of them. Education, what I went into, 4.2% of students are going into. Part of what I eventually want schools to do is that rather than having specializations happen when you go into college, is that there'll be some way to do more specializations at the high school level. For example, by the time you enter junior year, obviously you get to choose like your electives and things like that. But I wish there were more options for credit earning versus just straight AP classes. If you decided you wanted to go into pre-med, maybe you can start some certain kinds of science classes at the high school level to prepare you for that. There was a poll done by an organization called Learn for Life called What Do Parents Really Want for Their Children's Education, released in January of 2024 of this year. They polled about 5,000 parents, and these are some of the things that they said they were wanting to change in the school. So about 92% say that it's important to ensure students graduate from grade to grade based on their competency in the subject matter rather than how much they sit in the class. 86% said that it's important to help address societal inequities by keeping kids connected to food, counseling, and technology such as laptops and Wi-Fi, especially in rural areas and for students of color. 86% say it's important to treat the behaviors associated with trauma-induced stress and grief as opportunities to teach life skills, not as disciplinary cases. And 89% that it's important to structure schools to serve individual students and understand that not all students learn the same way. Pretty much meaning individualized education, which is a huge thing that in my college program that we talked about. Individualized education essentially means that teaching to the students and like learning the way they learn, the different accommodations that each different kinds of students need, different project-based learning, different learning strategies rather than traditional the teacher stands in front of the room and lectures them and they all take notes. So pretty much a majority want some kind of individualized instruction or essentially like more personalized help for students, which they deserve. Um, Part of the problem why this doesn't always happen, especially once you go into bigger and bigger schools, is that there's not the ratio of teachers to students gets too large. So that's why there's so many advocates for smaller class sizes because once they get above 30 plus kids in a room, it's very hard to for the teacher to try to reach everybody based on the limited time they have, all the different excuses you can say. But in general, we know that when kids have smaller class sizes, they each get more individual attention and that they get better outcomes in school overall. Part of the big thing I see here is that they're talking about just like fairness and having students have the resources they need to be successful. If a student is hungry, they can't learn. If a student is going through mental health issues, especially once they start going to middle and high school, the counseling is very important and having access to that. I went to a school that was like 3,000 plus students, and there's barely any time to go see a counselor. And if they're available, are they willing to help you with more than just academic things or willing to help with mental health issues or things that are going on at home? Uh, it's tricky, and a lot of students are afraid to get those resources, or they think that nobody's looking out for them. To say that there were a lot of complicated reasons for how I ended up becoming an education major and ultimately becoming a teacher. It wasn't my original intention. I pretty much didn't have an original intention. I was still struggling with identity and what I really had a passion for, like differentiating like the hobbies I had versus like what I really wanted to do as a career, and I ended up almost falling into it just based on my abilities. So, unfortunately, right now I'm no longer a classroom teacher, and we're going to talk about it in the next, not in the next episode, but in the next part of education. I'm going to be giving my experience as a teacher and some of the best and worst times I had as being a classroom and online teacher at points. It's it's a very difficult career path. It's something that I have struggled to um, try to navigate my feelings around because I do believe that eventually I will go back into the education system in a certain capacity. But as of right now, it's been a struggle feeling valued as a teacher and feeling that what I'm doing is really having a positive impact on my students. I'm going to be going into my different teaching jobs not too long from now in one of our future episodes, and you'll be able to hear my firsthand experience of being a teacher in many different types of environments. And stay tuned for the next episode. It's going to be our first interview podcast. So, looking forward to that. And thank you so much for listening to the Work It Out podcast. I'll see you next Tuesday.